Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to start a very spontaneous video. I have no idea how this will go, but I'm very excited nonetheless. So I am currently in a situation of my life that is very overwhelming. A lot of stuff's going on, and I'm starting to lose a little bit the spark with my reading. With a lot of the stuff I'm currently reading, my brain is just not really in it. And so when my friend Xenia from the channel, Xenia and the Books, mentioned that she is about to start reading Hunger Games for the first time, I was like, I need to join you. We need to do a buddy read with this. And so the thing is, I have the German copies, and I think I have read Hunger Games maybe 3 or 4 times already. I'm not quite sure about the numbers anymore, but it should be either 3 or 4 times. And I have never read the original trilogy in English before. So when last year the Haymitch prequel came out, I thought I would reread Hunger Games, but then I never did because I had so many other books to read. And I feel like this is the sign now to finally do a reread. So what I want to do now is I want to head to the library. Last time I was there, they still had the whole trilogy in English available. So I hope they're still there. I will try to grab them now so I can do this buddy read with my friend. I will obviously link her channel down below, and you need to check her out because her videos are so fantastic. And yeah, I will vlog this experience because I have never done a vlog about me reading The Hunger Games. When I read them the first time, I didn't even do book videos yet. So yeah, it feels like the perfect opportunity to do a series reading vlog of me reading The Hunger Games for like the 4th, maybe 5th time. And yeah, I can't wait. I hope this will be fun to watch for you. This is one of my favorite series of all time. I feel very passionate about Katniss as a character. I really identified with her when I read the books the first time. And yeah, let's just do it. Let's just do it. I hope I won't get disappointed. You know, sometimes when you love something so much for such a long time, you get like really scared you won't feel it anymore. But yeah, the way this works is I will update this vlog when I'm halfway through, and then when I have finished the book, I will try to keep things spoiler free, but there will be specific spoiler parts where we can discuss. I think by now most people who are really into books have read Hunger Games, so I think a lot of you can watch the spoiler parts, but just so you know, they will always be clearly marked in the chapters, and I will warn you before I start talking about spoilers. So without further ado, let's just go and try to grab those books from the library. So we are already halfway through Hunger Games. It went by very, very quickly, and I'm happy to report that I think this is definitely exactly what I needed right now. And the buddy reading experience as well is just super, super great. I think it's so fun to reread this as my friend Xenia is reading it for the first time. So I can get all of her reactions being surprised by the plot, while I have all of my nostalgia of reading it again and obviously knowing how everything will play out. And I think it's so fascinating doing this reread because I already know where everything will lead and how much is to come, which is incredible when you are just halfway through The Hunger Games, because this book, while it is so action-packed, it still takes its time to really introduce everything to the reader. And I think it's just so masterfully done. Like every time I come back to this series, I'm a little bit worried it won't hold up. I'm like, maybe, you know, I'm growing out of YA. And then I start reading the books and I'm like, no, this is actually a masterpiece, because there is not a single sentence moments in the first around 180 pages that I have read right now that I would like strike from the book. Like every single word is important and makes sense in the context that we're given it. Let me just say, Katniss is such a fantastic character. So now, if you have never heard about the Hunger Games, which I can't imagine, but you know, this series follows a girl called Katniss. She lives in a world called Panem, and she is one of the residents of District 12, which is a mining district. It's basically the poorest district and the one that the people really look down upon. And every year there is a thing called the Hunger Games, where 2 children are chosen from each district, and it's 12 in total, and they have to go into this arena and fight to the death until only one survives. In this year, something happens. You can probably imagine that Katniss ends up being the one going to the arena for her district. Now, I don't want to say too much about this. I think the story is so well known. But yeah, it has this like Roman-inspired thing where you have a lot of terminology, the capital, Panem, all of that is very much Roman-inspired, which, you know, is one of my like favorite things. I love Latin as a language and all of that. You just have this idea of these terrible games that are big entertainment in the capital where the rich people are. But for the districts who have to actually send their kids there, it's devastating. And so it's a tool of power, basically. So we have a dystopia here that is really interrogating this type of society where there is this like top class of people who have everything, who have too much, to be honest, which we don't explore so much in this book yet, but it will show up later. And then we have all of these districts who have to work their asses off to not starve. And that's pretty much Katniss's story as well, because from a very young age, she had to take care of her family and she had to be the provider. She had to make sure that there was food on the table. And she is just a very traumatized character because of that. She has lived through so much terrible stuff. And so for her, kind of going to the Hunger Games is basically just a dot on the I. It's not like, you know, it makes her life so much worse, to be honest, but it does seem to mean certain death for her. But still, she's also a very capable person because of that, because she had to take care of her family for so long, and she also had to do some illegal activities to achieve that goal. And so she's a very good hunter, for example. And so she does have skills. It's not like she's like underpowered in the arena. And I think that makes Katniss such an interesting character, because like so much of her life has been about survival, and now she's in the games. That is once again just what she has to do, and she is capable, but she's also still a child in a way. Like I think she's 16, and so yeah, there's just so much going on. I think the character study of Katniss alone, I could write essays on it. I just adore Katniss as a main character. When I read this the first time, I related so much to a lot of her experiences, obviously in a different way, but I still think that Katniss is a character that like I connected with on a very, very deep level. And for a YA book written during that time, I think she's a fantastic main character, because you know, a lot of the things that we might be annoyed about with like those YA female main characters, it's not actually quite the thing with Katniss. And we do have a lot going on with some other characters in this as well, and all of them are so intriguing. But I think for the first half of the book, we mainly focus on getting to know Katniss and her situation and her family and her values and what's important to her and what she's fighting for. And as I said, like basically her survival and how she managed it for such a long time against all odds. We do get a little bit of a hint of Peeta already, but it's really fascinating, as I said, because I'm buddy reading it with my friend and she's experiencing it for the first time. She kind of reflects all the feelings you have with like all the information you have from this book about Peeta. So it's like very interesting. I think the one thing that already stands out, and we have this like roof scene, it's one of my favorite scenes of the whole trilogy, basically, where he talks about how he doesn't want to lose his identity and himself in the games and that he wants to stand up for something. And I think it's so interesting to contrast with Katniss and the way the trauma made her like this person who survives, and Peter is not that. Like, he is striving for something else entirely, and Katniss can't understand that. Like, she literally can't understand that, and because of that, when you read this book and you have like no clues about what's going to happen, you really don't know what's up with Peter. And it's so interesting, and it's like so much fun. I'm like so happy we are doing this buddy read, and I'm like trying to be so careful not to spoil anything at all. It's a ton of fun, and it's exactly what I needed. It's so fun to really just sit down and read a book right now, a book that my brain immediately latches onto and can take in, because so much has been going on in my life and I've had such a hard time connecting to a story. So yeah, I'm so happy we're doing this, and I'm so happy to continue on. We are at the halfway point now in the arena. There's obviously so much going on outside of it as well. Maybe just to mention Cinna. Cinna is like one of my favorite like outside the arena characters, and the moment where they say goodbye when Katniss has to enter the arena, I already cried a little bit. And obviously there is some foreshadowing with things there that I don't want to mention, but yeah, I think a lot of people have already read this series and know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, Cinna is so great, and that's something I discussed with Xenia as well, is how the people we see in the capital, they're not like horrible, terrible people. They are people living a life that they have grown used to. That's just their normal lives, that each year they watch teenagers kill each other. And the way that, especially for Cinna as well, this is like his art. He is a designer, he makes clothes, and in that way, with his art, he also helps them survive, because or give them a better chance of surviving. Like, obviously only one person can survive, that's the whole thing, but because of his clothing, the kids can stand out more and have a better chance of actually surviving all of this. But still, like, he is part of the system as well. So it's like really complex, and you can see that a lot of the people in the capital, they don't actually think about what's going on too much, because there is so much pomp around it that it's easy for them to forget what they're actually doing. And I think at a later point I might talk a little bit more about Effie in that regard, but I feel like we haven't seen like too much of Effie yet. I think it's more interesting to talk about her later. But yeah, so far really enjoying that reread, having a great time, and I can't wait to read the second half, and then I'll be back. I am back because I have just finished my reread of The Hunger Games, and it was such a journey. Now, this time around, it did take me a little bit longer to read. I think one reason for that is that this is the first time I'm reading the English copy, and then I've also been very, very busy the last couple of days, but still, I feel like it was such a good rereading experience, especially as I have mentioned before, because I'm doing it with my friend Xenia, and I feel like just seeing how she reacts to everything that is going on, obviously not knowing what will happen in the future books, it's just such a great reminder of the journey you can actually go on when you read these books for the first time. But I think they also have like such a good rereadability, because you just pick up on so many things that you haven't really realized the first time around. Like, there's already a mention of Joanna, for example, and there's just so much in here where I'm like, there are already hints for things, and just like just like the little stuff that you can only understand if you have read the series before. And I have done so many, many times, as I said. So yeah, I had a great old time giving this 5 stars on reread for sure. This is one of my favorite series of all time, so I don't think that will ever change. But it's also like so cool to see your favorite books hold up in a way, because like whenever I start a reread, I'm always a little bit worried that it's not going to be as amazing as it was the last time. But it is, and I'm happy. I don't really know if I can say a lot about the second half without spoilers, apart from, it is very action-packed. I think like the beginning, like the first third of the book is not slow, but it's maybe when you're reading it the first time, I remember being like, okay, but when are we getting into the games? But the second half of the book is when you're getting into the games. It's like, it's all the game. And so yeah, you have like a lot of the terrible stuff going on, and it's at times like so sad, and you just have to accept that this is kind of the setup, that this is the Hunger Games, and there is no like magical cure that can make the setup go away, and so you will have to be prepared to say goodbye to these characters in a way. And so that's really heartbreaking, and I think it's still like such a good job, because Katniss is like in such a survival mode like all the time, and it's really the only thing she considers is survival. However, there are moments when you can see that she's not indifferent. She really cares about some of the stuff that happens, but she's also very strategic about the things that she will show to the cameras. And in that regard, I just love Katniss as a character so much, and I love Peeta as well. It was, as I said, so fun to be reminded through Xenia of the kind of journey you go on, because like Katniss doesn't know what Peeta is up to, and so you as a reader in the first book have no idea what he's up to. But yeah, it was just like so nice to do this reread, and I'm so stoked to go into the second one in a minute. And we agreed that we will completely marathon the series, and I'm so happy to do it. So yeah, this was amazing. So because I think a lot of the people have read this first book already, I think I want to go into a couple of spoilery thoughts now. Let's discuss a little bit more, because I've never done like actual videos on this series, so I feel like we should talk a little bit. So let's get into spoilers. If you have not read the book yet for some reason and you really don't want to know, then you can skip ahead through the chapters to the spoiler-free thoughts on book 2. Spoilers ahead. As I said, Katniss, I love her. Her character is so fantastic to me, and especially in the first half of the book, but like all throughout this story, I feel like you really have no line, no sentence that is not extremely important to show you who the characters are and what the capital is like and what Panem is like and how it all works. I feel like this is such a great book because there is absolutely no waste. Now, the things that on reread always get a little bit annoying to me, especially at the beginning of the book, is the flashbacks we get where Katniss thinks about Gale, because obviously I hate Gale. I'm not making that a secret. We can discuss the reasons for that later on, but I think he's so icky, and that already starts in this first book. Like, there's already those moments where I'm like, oh my god, like, he is such a red flag. There is this moment when Gale says goodbye to Katniss before she has to go to the capital, and he's like, yeah, killing people is not really different from killing animals if you just, like, ignore that they're people. And I'm like, oh my god, like, if you know, but like, such a red flag already. I guess he is supposed to be like kind of the more like radical one, being in the woods and shouting about how terrible the capital is. And I love that Katniss is more of a pragmatic character. She's like, yeah, I don't like what they're doing, but what am I supposed to do about this? Like, Katniss in like all the series is like a very pragmatic character, character who gets dragged into stuff that she doesn't really understand or wants to be a part of, and she's only ever doing these things for the people she loves. And that's where Prim comes in, obviously, because the whole reason Katniss goes to the games is Prim, and that her name gets pulled in the selection, in the reaping. And I remember reading it for the first time, and I was just so in shock when they read out the name, because when you start the book, I think you assume that Katniss is going to be picked for the Hunger Games. But this whole thing is like already setting up the story to be different. You can already tell just from the fact like how it's described, like how the tributes from District 12 never really have a chance in the games, and then Katniss volunteers, and you can already tell, okay, like something is going to be very different about these games, and I think it makes the story worthwhile to tell. So even while you're not quite sure like what's gonna happen and like why are these games special, like why is this the game, but it in that moment it already starts to make sense that things are slightly off, things are slightly different. And then we obviously get Peter picked as well, and we don't really know Peter at that point, even though obviously he's one of my favorite characters in oh, the boy with the bread. I love him so much. And honestly, I didn't remember like how early on we get the backstory with the bread. I had always thought it was like later in the books, but we get it like very, very early on when Katniss is thinking about how she doesn't want to be picked with Peter because she feels like she owes him. And we can see how different Peter and Katniss are in this moment already. Because for Katniss, it is about survival. And she, while she appreciates that she got the help, she also feels like she will now forever owe Peter because he gave her the bread. While for Peter, he doesn't even think about that incident anymore. It was something like some little chance he had to show Katniss that he cared about her, but he never, ever did that in like thinking that she would owe him anything. And that is already such a stark contrast between these two characters that we just see like again and again in the way they approach the games as well. And obviously then we have the whole Haymitch situation. Yeah, I love Haymitch, but I remember in the first book I was like, oh my god, this man is irritating and I hate him. So it's definitely a character that grows on you once you understand what he's been through and what he's going through. And especially now that we have like Sunrise on the Reaping, obviously it makes even more sense. But I think like we didn't really need that. We get enough information about Haymitch throughout the trilogy that by the end we're like, yeah, okay, now we understand Haymitch and why he is the way he is at the beginning of the book. And so I love the fact that Haymitch and Katniss have this connection where they irritate each other so much because they are in a way very, very similar. And Haymitch basically can look into Katniss's head and he knows exactly how to communicate with her, how to aggravate her, but also how to get her to do the things she needs to do. And we have the situation so many times where Haymitch is like, yeah, I don't need to talk to Peter about this because he already knows what to do. But Katniss, you are the problem. Like, you need to get what we're doing here. And so, yeah, I love their connection, even though in the first book, it doesn't really show up until like the very end when you're like, okay, this is really what's going on in a way. And this is what Haymitch is trying to achieve here. And that leads us to like some other characters like Cinna. I love Cinna so much. And I think the portrayal of him in the movies is also so spot on that like whenever I read the scenes with him, I like immediately see the movie scenes as well. And just this like very calm man who's like so strong in his like serenity in a way. I love him so much. Then we have Effie. I gotta be honest, I forgot that the whole like bracelet thing is in the second book. I thought it was in the first book, but I think it's in the second book because it didn't happen here. Again, we don't really get a lot of Effie in the first book, so for now she's just like this person who is like slightly annoyed because no one's ever listening to her, but obviously we will grow to know so much more about her in the future. Okay, so let's talk about the games, I guess, because I don't like feel like there is like a lot else to say. Maybe like the one thing, like one of my favorite scenes is the scene on the roof before they go to the games, where Peeta and Katniss are talking about like kind of what they expect from the games, and Peeta is talking about how he wants to die as himself. And I think that Katniss is like so set on her survival. For one, she doesn't really understand what he means. Like, she's completely confused what he's talking about, and she thinks he's kind of like talking down to her, which is like not the case, but it's like how she interprets it, because she is stuck in this like survival mode and she can't really think about much else. But obviously, Peeta, at this point already, we know he's in love with Katniss. So in the reread, you're like, he doesn't even consider surviving. Like, this is not what this is for him. He has already decided that he will try to help Katniss survive. And we see that again reflected in the second book, which we will not get into right here. But, you know, this is kind of like this moment where, you know, when you're rereading it and you're looking back on this scene, you're like, yeah, he doesn't have like a strategy how to survive. He doesn't need it. It's not what he wants to do. But still, he has like this strong spirit that he's like, hey, I don't want them to win. I want to be myself, even if they put me in this situation. So as I said, again, this is just one of those scenes where you can really see the contrast between like Peeta's approach and Katniss's approach. And then they go into the arena. Obviously, there's a ton of stuff that happens, and I don't want to talk about all of it. I think like the one big thing that happens is Rue, and it is one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the whole trilogy, but it is also a little bit of a preparation for something that will happen in the third book. And yeah, Rue, it's just, I really like that we get Rue and Thrash as the characters from District 11, and that it is kind of like portrayed as those two districts, 11 and 12, kind of like bonding together even a little bit through their tributes, because they are like the two poorest districts. Now, I do think that, you know, the agriculture district being like Black people is a little bit very much on the nose with like the slavery association, but I think also it is like very good to see kind of like the portrayal of Rue and Thrash and how honorable and just like great people they are, and they're so talented. And obviously Thrash is like very strong, but Rue is also like very good at like climbing in the trees and kind of staying hidden and out of the way and surviving on her own terms. And I think that is like one of the things I really love about the series, because it would be so easy to just like have like the strong, you know, muscular people be the winners. But if you consider kind of like who makes it far into the games, you have a very different array of like talents. You have like the fox face girl, and I don't know, I think we never know her actual name, and she's just like really smart. She's kind of like stealing from the careers all the time without them noticing, which is like an amazing feat. And we have Rue, who can like climb in the trees and knows which plants to eat to survive, similar to Thrash, who just goes into the cornfield and he knows what to eat there to survive. We also have like the strong people, but they are sometimes like very easily killed. Like the guy from District 1 is like one shot of Katniss's bow and he's gone. So I think it's like very interesting to see that. And we have this one boy, I don't remember the district, maybe it was 8, who is described as having a physical disability. And he also makes it very far into the games, because it is not about like you having the perfect physique. It is about knowing how to survive. And I think that is such a great portrayal in this book that I appreciate every single time I read them. And people just have these very, very different strategies on how to survive. And they are building on their individual strengths, which we should all do. So then we do get the announcement that the 2 tributes from the same district can be winners together, and then Katniss obviously runs off to find Peeta. So up until that point, we have the situation that Katniss thinks that Peeta has betrayed her and that he teamed up with the couriers to kill her, when instead it's like exactly the opposite. Like he tried to get them onto kind of like the wrong path, so they wouldn't find her and they would underestimate her and stuff like that. And he also protects her when they have like the wasp venom, and he gets wounded by Cato, whatever his name is. So then Katniss finds him, and I do really like that part as well. I haven't even talked about the explosion, but yeah, that whole plan, like Katniss is so smart. And I'm also listening to Dungeon Crawler Call 3 right now while I read this one, and the tendency to blow things up, you know, just a little comparison there. And I do like me some characters who blow shit up. So I do really like this whole thing we get like in the cave. I think again we have this portrayal of Katniss, who is very in survival mode. She's being very pragmatic, but also is trying to be very strategic. So she is like really pushing on the romance angle, but because she knows this is what Haymitch would want, because that is what sells in the capital. And on the other hand, we have Peeta, who we on the reread know is actually in love with her, and for him is not a game. And I think it is like, even if you read it, like I'm not quite sure how well it comes across on the first read, but even Katniss has these moments where she's like, "Oh, it does feel kind of real for him." Like, is this real for him? Again, I feel like you really see how different they are in their approach to the games. And also that moment at the end before the berries, when Peeta is like, yeah, shoot me, because like I will not leave here without you. I want you to be the winner. I think Katniss doesn't really understand in that moment, and she gets like really angry because she's like, I'm not going back without you either, because that would be like the worst thing, is like going back without you. But it's not because she's in love with him, it's because she like cares, and also because she wants to have someone who understands what she has experienced. But that's not love, you know what I mean? And I think that is something that we see like later on in this series as well, how for Katniss it is so much about like having this one person who went through all of these things that she had to go through as well, and having that connection. But because of her trauma, and Katniss's trauma starts way before the games, but obviously it gets so much worse with the games. And because of that trauma, Katniss will always stay in that survival mode, and she will not have the capacity to be in love with anyone. And so for me, and we will discuss that further as we go through the books, for me, there is no romance in the Hunger Games series, because Katniss does not fall in love with anyone for real in this series. We can discuss. Okay, I think that was a lengthy update for this first book, but I just love these books so much. So yeah, I hope we can discuss in the comments later. But for now, let me start reading Catching Fire. So I'm now halfway through Catching Fire and it's going so well. Catching Fire is my favorite book of the trilogy, so it's really, really fun to do this reread. And I must be honest with you, all my comments that I'm sending to Xenia right now about our buddy read are about how much I hate Gale. It's just I can't change that about me. Like, I try to be so careful because I don't want to color her judgment of any of the characters because obviously she's reading it for the first time. But like, God, I hate Gale and I hate Gale, especially in the first half of this book. I think this is his like worst time to shine. He's really bringing out all the things I hate about him in the first half of this book. I say this is a spoiler-free update. However, I want to clarify that there are some things that will be clear from what I say about how the first book goes. I will try to be as vague as possible, but just so you're warned, if you absolutely do not want to know anything and you haven't read the books yet, you haven't seen the movies, then maybe I will give away a little bit too much for you. Just so you've been warned. This second book starts about 6 months after the end of the Hunger Games. So we have had a little bit of our characters kind of settling into their new reality, dealing with the post-traumatic stress that they have from what happened in the first book. And we see that especially with Katniss because of, for example, her nightmares that she still gets and that she has a very, very hard time dealing with. But we also see that with some of the other characters that they're still like trying to really wrap around their heads about, you know, what has happened. Now, we do have this situation where Katniss is under a lot of pressure because of what happened at the end of Hunger Games. She did something that the Capitol deemed as completely unexcusable, and so they are putting pressure on her to pretend to have done it for like very silly girly reasons, just so they can kind of dismiss what she did. However, that's not actually true, and that's not actually who Katniss is. And Katniss, in her core, is like very bad at hiding who she really is. Like, she's trying really, really hard, and you can see that in Hunger Games and in the beginning of this book. But she just can't succeed with the amount of pressure that there is and kind of the expectations that are brought to her. They're very unrealistic in that sense. So Katniss is under a lot of this pressure, but she's also still trying to do what she has been doing this whole time, and that is protect the people she loves. And I think that is why I love Katniss as a main character so much, because that is such a relatable thing. She is a character that has been through so much. She was already traumatized before she got into the Hunger Games, but obviously now the trauma is just stacking up for her, and she is still trying to do everything she can to protect the people she loves. The problem is that not all the people are appreciative of that and understand what is going on. And that's kind of where we get into the Gale thing, and I'm not gonna say like too much here, but like Gale is just so frustrating as a character for me, because in the first half of the book you can see that he doesn't understand Katniss, he doesn't listen to what she's saying, and he has this picture of Katniss that has nothing to do with her lived reality. And because of that, he expects things from her that she simply is not willing to give, and that she explicitly says that she cannot give, and yet he will come back around again and again. Apart from that, we do have some very horrible things happening to like the world in general because of what happened at the end of the first book. There are things going on that put a lot of people in danger, and we can see that Katniss has such a hard time dealing with the fact that she might have some responsibility in that whole situation, even though as a reader, especially as an adult reader, you can totally see that obviously this has nothing to do with Katniss. This responsibility is placed upon her to kind of have a scapegoat and also to make her pliable, because like the people in her life are threatened. So there is a lot going on. Now, what I do want to say is we do have another round of the games in Catching Fire. However, at the halfway point, they haven't even started yet. So just be prepared that if you are going into the series for the games, they are less prominent than you might think, but then when they're happening, there is so much happening. Like whenever I reread Catching Fire, I'm so surprised how much time we spend with the characters before the next round of the games, because once the games start, there is still like so much going on, and there will be so many new characters that we meet still in the second half of the book. And I'm just like amazed. I'm like sitting here like, how has nothing of that happened yet? And I'm halfway through, like, how does this work? But again, as with the first book, I think that Suzanne Collins does such a good job of taking time when needed, but then also there is just nothing in this book that you could take out. It is so concise, and every little bit that we get is so well thought out, and I love that about that series. Where I stop right now at the end of chapter 13, we do have this moment where Katniss thinks she is kind of leaving her home for the last time, and the whole thing, like how that happens, it's so sad and it's so tragic. And if you know the series, it is such a tragic moment. So that's why I decided to kind of stop with this chapter, because I was like, okay, I think I'm just gonna I need to breathe a little bit before we move into what happens next. And I think this is like the halfway point of the book is definitely where things change. Like what happens changes, the cast of characters we're faced with changes, and I would say the focus that we have in the first half of the book of like the trauma and what that does to our protagonist, and then also kind of like this looming threat, and it turns into something different in the second half. And I can't wait to do my reread of that second half, and so I'm gonna stop yapping because otherwise we will have another 2-hour vlog, and I'm gonna get reading. So I have finished reading Catching Fire, and I am here for that update. Now, as I said in my previous update, the second half of this book feels very different from the first half. We're going back to the capital, there is going to be games again, and again we follow Katniss as she has to navigate all of this space. However, this time around it is very different. Katniss is in a very, very different spot. And we do get a lot of new characters that this time around might stick around for a little bit of a longer time. Not all of them, but some of them. And we also start losing some other characters that maybe we did not expect would be the kind of people that we lose. So I'm trying to be very vague here, but yeah, the stakes for the second half of this book are incredibly high again, and it's still very fast paced. And I think it is always so interesting when I think about the games in this book. It just feels like very vivid. It's like something that I can always remember like every single part of, and still it's like a third of the book, you know what I mean? It feels like so much larger than life in a way. It like overshadows everything else that is going on in the book in a way. And so I'm always fascinated how little of the book it actually is when I reread it. This is my favorite book of the series. I think you cannot write a better second book than this one, because it really manages to take the pieces of the first book but build them up and just rearranging stuff in a way that it still feels fresh. You still have no idea what's happening, and the stakes feel even higher. And I think that is such an incredible thing to do. Now, apart from that, I feel like I can't really say too much more. That is completely like vague and spoiler free. I still really enjoy Katniss as a character. In the second half of the book, she definitely doesn't have like that much development. She's like very focused on one particular goal and very focused on yeah, just like sticking to this goal and working out a way to get this done, which is again a little bit different from what we've read about her up until that point, because a lot of the time Katniss doesn't really know what she's supposed to be doing. Like, she's in situations that are so unprecedented for her that she can just kind of go along with the flow a little bit. While in the second half of this book, she has like a very clear objective, and the whole question for her is like how to get this thing done. Now, a lot of the characters we get introduced in this second part of the book, like Finnick, like Joanna, I love them so much. And obviously, because I know what is going to happen, reading some of these scenes already hurts like a bitch. I'm not gonna lie. But again, I'm rereading this with my friend Xenia, and she's experiencing all of this for the first time. So I try to like really not, give any hints away, basically. But it has been really fun. We have been sending each other like little screenshots, marking certain quotes and stuff like that. So yeah, the rereading experience is still like the most fun I've had reading a book in a long, long time, and I'm so happy we're doing it. So yeah, just a perfect sequel, I would say. And I think I will go into a couple of spoilers now. I don't think I have like too much else to say, but we'll see. I always come up with stuff and then the update is way too long. Spoilers ahead, use the chapters to get to my mostly spoiler-free thoughts of Mockingjay. As I said, some things are just very, very hard to not be able to talk about. Obviously, in the second half of the book, and in this book in general, we find out that our characters, both Katniss and Peeta, have to go back into the arena. But before we get to experience all that, there's already a lot going on. And I have mentioned in my first update that the first half of the book, for me personally, really zooms in also on the relationship of Gale and Katniss. And I hate Gale. I really, really hate Gale. I think he's such an awful character. And obviously I can say that with like a certain amount of like certainty because of like what's happening in the series. But even if you just read the first half of this book, he is so not great. He's like a walking red flag. Like, even in the first book, when he talks to Katniss about killing people because you just forget that they're people and then it's easy, that is already such a big red flag. But then the whole like relationship dynamic, he doesn't care about consent. We have two, I think it's two scenes where consent is like really not important to him. We obviously have the one kiss that we learn about when Katniss is visited by President Snow in her house, which is like such a scary scene. You know, the whole like description of that scene, it just shows that Katniss never had even a chance to consent. Like, it wasn't a kiss that built up from a moment where you could say, well, at least there was like implied consent. He just basically runs up to her and kisses her. And maybe because like I have experienced stuff like that as well, and I just found it very overwhelming and kind of like not great. I really feel for Katniss in that moment. And then we have the whole thing where he confesses his love, and then Katniss very, very, very clearly states that for her, this whole thing is not about love. She tells Peeta that at the end of the first book, I think, and she tells Gale very specifically and very openly and explicitly in the first half of this book, and he just ignores it. You can really tell like her relationship with Peeta in the first half of this book is so strained because like obviously Peeta is hurting, but he doesn't put the pressure on Katniss to like change her mind. He is just kind of open with his own feelings, and he refuses to hide his pain, which I think is okay. Like, he can do that. However, whenever Katniss needs him, he is there for her, and that is without like any buts and ifs. So you know, he is really like a good friend and he is trying to be okay with it while again not hiding his own feelings. On the other hand, we have Gale, who is like completely convinced that only if Peter wasn't there, Katniss would absolutely be in love with him, and if she wouldn't be in love with him, then at least he could make her. And I just hate that so much. I hate that guy so much. Okay, I'm just gonna stop here, but yeah, Gale always makes it all about himself. It's never about Katniss, it's never about what Katniss wants, it's all about himself, and we can talk more about that in the spoiler part of the last book, because I have way more to say about Gale. I just don't like him. Then we have the whole revelation that the 75th Hunger Games is going to be all tributes from the victors. And I really like the way that Katniss reacts to this news. You can definitely see her PTSD really like coming through. She's like running away. Her flight response is triggered immediately. Like she doesn't even understand what has really happened yet, but she's already fleeing. And then when her brain kind of catches up through this first response, she then decides to go to Haymitch and to make this deal that they will try to save Peter, because like Katniss really has a lot of guilt and she thinks that Peter is so much of a better person than her, and because of that she really wants him to live. Like she cannot live with this idea that Peter might be killed to give her the chance to live. And so we have this like very difficult dynamic. And again, I love how Peter absolutely knows what's going on with that, but he doesn't misinterpret that as kind of like romantic love from Katniss. He never really like goes back into that moment and is like, hey, maybe she's changed her mind and stuff like that. Like he really is so accepting and kind of like waiting for Katniss to make a move if she wants to. So we have this whole situation, and then we have like their little training montage, and then obviously this very, very harrowing scene where after that reaping, they get pushed into the train immediately. They have no chance to say goodbye. And if you have read the whole trilogy, I feel like this makes it like even more sad in the way, but either way, like the moment they get on the train, at least for Katniss, but probably for Peter as well, they are very, very certain that they will not see District 12 ever again, and they had no chance to say goodbye. And then they get obviously introduced to all of the other victors, and I have already mentioned, like, we meet Finnick. I love Finnick so much, and I really feel like we're going on a journey with like Katniss and Finnick in this first book. Like they really have to learn to trust each other, and his first introduction with the sugar cubes, it's so funny, it's so good. And then we also have Joanna, which is one of my favorite characters. I just love this dynamic if we have like a female main character in a YA book and she's like very serious but also kind of insecure a little bit, and then we have this other girl and she's like so good at pushing the buttons, and in the long run they actually do become friends because they do realize that they can help each other. And it's kind of like exactly that dynamic, even though we don't see all of it in this book yet. But I love Joanna and yeah, I already feel like so much for her. Like obviously in this book we learned that she has already lost all of the people that matter to her because of the Capitol probably, and in that regard she is also very similar to Haymitch. And also for me, whenever I read these books, it feels very much of like this picture of like what Katniss could become if the Capitol manages to take everyone away from her in a way. So I really love her. We obviously also have BT and Virus, and I feel so bad for Virus because, yeah, her portrayal is a little bit like wonky. I feel like in general, we do have a lot of characters that have suffered so much trauma, and we see all of the different responses to that. We have Finnick, who's very much trying to just keep the people he loves safe and alive. So in that regard, he is so similar to Katniss, which is something we explore more in Mockingjay. But then also, we do have people like what was it, District 6, like the addicts, and then also we have Virus, who seem to just have suffered so much mentally that they just can't pull themselves together completely anymore. And Virus just seems like maybe someone who, yeah, has so much trauma that she can't really like put all her thoughts together in a very like understandable way anymore. So BT has to translate her a lot, but still she's super smart and she's the one who figures out the clock. And I just wish the portrayal would be just a little bit different of her. What I do appreciate about the books and what we don't get so much in the movies is the way that the lingering effects on these victors of the games are portrayed. So we have the PTSD, we have the physical disabilities, we have people who have lost limbs like Peeta, or who just suffered so much mentally like Annie and the addicts that they can't go back to a normal life, that they are just so marked by these games that they will forever be victors, but they can never return to what they were before they entered the games, basically. So I really love that we get an exploration of that, but I don't think it's always like completely perfect. Like also something I haven't really talked about before, but like Peeta does get kind of a prosthetic for his leg, and he can walk with that like pretty much immediately, which I don't think is like super realistic. I think you would at least need some like training with it to be able to walk with it. But you know, the medical stuff of the Capitol always is kind of like up and down. Like they can do like remove all of, you know, the scar tissue you ever had in your life. And so with some other stuff, it's just like, okay, they can do this, they can't do that. We just have to accept that. But I definitely appreciate that, at least in the books, it's not all magical cures to the effects that these people have from their wounds. And so by the end of the book, we obviously have the whole scene with the electricity and the arrow and the bringing down of the arena, which is obviously what was supposed to happen this whole time. And we do learn that Katniss and Peeta are pretty much the only people who had no idea what was going on. So in that regard, Katniss feels extreme betrayal. So it's this paragraph that I sent to Xenia. It's an awful lot to take in, this elaborate plan in which I was a piece, just as I was meant to be a piece in the Hunger Games, used without consent, without knowledge. At least in the Hunger Games, I knew I was being played with. And I think this is such an important moment for Katniss, moving on to Mockingjay and her whole relationship with Haymitch, with District 13, and everything that is going to happen next. So yeah, this is definitely a super traumatic ending, something that I think about like all the time in a way. Like whenever I think about the Hunger Games, I think about the ending of Catching Fire, because it's just, it is stuck so in my brain. This whole like confusion and what can only be a couple of minutes, but it changes everything about the series. And so I'm very excited to go into Mockingjay now, and I am very excited to keep discussing it with Xenia. And I'm particularly interested because reading it the first time, a lot of people don't like Mockingjay, but with every single reread, I appreciate Mockingjay more. So it's going to be very interesting to see what our discussions will be like. And I will be back once I'm reading it. So I'm now currently halfway through Mockingjay, and I wanted to give you a quick update. Now, the reading of Mockingjay has been more of a struggle than the other books. I feel like Mockingjay is just that book that, is not quite as exciting as the previous two, but I still feel like it does do a lot of very important things. And one of the reasons for that is that Mockingjay just gets a lot more realistic in some aspects, and especially with some of the stuff we see going on here, it's stuff that has also happened in the real world and in, previous times when I have reread the series. Those things were on the news. I would get like so angry because I remembered how people cried seeing this stuff in the movie, but then when it happens in real life, almost nobody even thinks about it twice. So I think this is like a very, very important thing that Mockingjay does, is like showing the horrors of war and the horrors of like violent conflicts and how they will always kind of target the weakest in society and how those are the people that will suffer. And we can just look away a lot of the time. We just close the news website or whatever if we don't want to think about it. But Mockingjay really makes you think about it, forces you to think about that. So that's one aspect. We also have a lot of like PTSD rep in this one. We see how some of our characters have suffered so much that they have now reached a breaking point. And I really like that this is not glossing over the emotional and psychological toll that so much trauma can have on a person. And there is also, in a way, this psychological warfare that is going on, and that our main character takes a while to really understand like how terrible it is and like what is really going on. But we do hit that point in the first half of this book where she really grasps for the first time like just how awful things are right now. And I think that is such a powerful moment. And we can also see that our main character is drawn to other characters that have suffered similar trauma, and that some people on the outside, they don't really understand that, and they even get jealous of that, which I think is just like so disgusting. Because obviously, if you just go through something so horrifying, it's like the most natural thing that you will turn to the people who have those similar experiences, who understand what you're going through, where you can share without being judged and give each other the help that, people who don't know those experiences just simply cannot give you. And so this portrayal of like, especially one character that I rant on and on about, and there's like jealousy that is portrayed in especially like one scene, and then our main character is like, whatever, I don't care about that because I need this connection right now to a person who has been through something similar. At the halfway point of this book, we do get a kind of a reunion in a way, and that is also such a dramatic scene. And I remember, like, every time I read this book, I remember the moment when I first read it and the shock of what Suzanne Collins is doing to us here. And it's really not very kind, like neither to us as readers nor to the characters. And it hurts every single time it happens, I swear. So that was definitely a tough scene to get through. And there is just so much like raw emotion in the first half of this book. Katniss feels very unhinged in a way, but like she doesn't fit into anything really. And when she's trying to make herself fit in, terrible things happen. And I think that this is like so interesting to look at from this perspective, from like Katniss's story. And we will get back to that once I have finished the book. I will talk a little bit more about what Mockingjay means for Katniss's story, because in a way, she, in this book, kind of gets swept up in this rebellion story, but it's not her story. She's still playing along to the rules of other people, and that in the end is what determines what happens to her story. So as I said, I will talk about this a little bit more once we have finished the book, but you can already see that so clearly in the first half of this book, how for Katniss, the games and also the performance for an audience hasn't ended, and we don't know if it ever will. So yeah, I'm having a great time still rereading this, even though it was a little bit more choppy than I would have liked to. And my ideal scenario would be that I finish this book today. We'll see whether that will happen, but either way, I will be back to talk about this very soon. And I'm back because I finished reading Mockingjay, and it is time to film the final clip for this vlog. Now, Mockingjay. It's a bleak book. It's kind of a sad book. It's a book that makes me cry. Like the ending, it was not pretty. It was not pretty. For a second, I was like, should I film my reaction? Because I had just watched Xenia's vlog for Hunger Games for the first book, and she did this amazing thing where she filmed her live reactions to the ending of the first book, and I love that. I love that, but I can never do it myself because my face doesn't make expressions while I read. I was crying quite a bit, and I was like, maybe I should film that when I finish this, but then I was like, who wants to see that? Honestly, who wants to see that? So I didn't film it, but it wasn't pretty, and you can believe me. Mockingjay, 5 stars. I saw that when I logged this as read again on Goodreads, that I had still set it as 4 stars, because when I originally read it, I did not like it quite as much. But with every reread, I understand more that Mockingjay needed to happen, that we needed this book to be the way it is to really finish off the story. So I have now set it up to 5 stars as well. And yeah, it's not happy, but this is not the kind of story that needs a happy ending, or that even should have a happy ending in that sense. And we can discuss that a little bit more in a second when I go more into spoilers. But basically, this whole book is like a huge tragedy for at least 2 of our main characters, if not more. So even though, you know, something happens at the end that you can turn in a way to say, it's actually good. It's good what happened, but not for our characters. And I think that is like the important thing for Mockingjay, and why when people are reading it for the first time, they usually don't love it. And I totally get it, but I can appreciate it more and more with time. I think that is all I want to say for the spoiler-free part. I hope you had fun watching this video. If you haven't read this book yet, then I would advise you to leave and have a lovely day, and thank you so much for watching. But if you have read Mockingjay, then I want to go into a couple of spoilers, because there's so much going on in this book that I feel I need to address, and I can't even do it in this video without it being like 2 hours long. So let's just get started. Spoilers ahead, you have been warned. Let's start out with the initial thing that we learn when we start reading this book. That is basically District 13 is alive, District 12 has been destroyed. We have a couple of survivors from District 12 who have been saved by Gale, and we do have the situation that Peeta has not been rescued from the arena Katniss has, and some of the other tributes also have not, but Finnick is with her basically. So we do start out this series in a very, very dark place for Katniss. And I think the PTSD rep that we get in this one is very, very strong in that sense. Katniss does have the different like trauma reactions, like memory loss. She often gets kind of like flashback situations, and she usually just runs away and hides from the world. That is until it becomes clear that she can actually do something when she agrees to be the Mockingjay. So because we see Peter on TV, Katniss has this idea of making a deal that he will get immunity if she agrees to be the Mockingjay for the rebels. And we can already start to see again how Katniss does not care really about the rebellion. She is still just trying to keep the people she loves safe. This is also where we start to meet President Coin of District 13, and we immediately see that they clash quite a bit. They don't trust each other, and Katniss is just not very comfortable with this person. She doesn't really do super well with authority in any case, and the kind of like strict coolness of Coin is something that I think sets Katniss off, as she can see kind of like a similar, I don't know, like weird restraint that maybe she also recognized in Snow, like this detached view of the citizens of the district. Katniss is also struggling with the question of why District 13 has never really helped the other districts. So this is again something that is kind of like feeding into her mistrust against President Coin. And she realizes very early on that President Coin will do the things that help her on her journey, and that she's very calculated in that way, which is the complete opposite of Katniss in a way, because Katniss at this cannot be very rational in a lot of her decisions. It's just she has suffered through so much trauma that this is not what is feasible for her. Now, we do get a lot of Gale at the beginning of this book, and I think I have made my perspective on Gale very clear in this vlog so far. But at the beginning, he almost seems better. He seems to be way more understanding of Katniss and actually focusing on her needs and kind of like what's going on with her. But then we do get these weird moments where we see that he is really enjoying this role that he now has in District 13. He is the hero who saved the District 12 people, and he also like ranked up very quickly in District 13 when he gets his little like communicuffs thing and whatever. So we see that he has now reached a position that in his mind has always been what he was meant for. Like he thinks this is exactly what he deserves to play a big and important role in the rebellion. And Katniss, and I very firmly believe that, for him is a way of making sure that he stays in the spotlight with the leading people in District 13. So when he's all understanding and caring towards Katniss, I think he is really just working towards District 13's goal of getting her ready to be the Mockingjay again. What we also see is that Gale starts spending a lot of time with BT in the weapons area of District 13. And they start coming up with these new kind of traps to make sure that they can actually capture the capital and kill President Snow. Towards the halfway point of the book, it becomes clear that without Peeta, this journey cannot go on, because we do have another TV appearance of Peeta, and he seems to be so much worse. He also gives an important tip to the rebels that they will be attacked, and because of that they manage to evacuate early enough so that no casualties happen. So now we have this situation where Peeta has actually helped them, and we can see that Katniss is again breaking down because of how Peeta is used by the capital, and so they decide to get Peter, and they also get Joanna, and they also get Annie from District 4, who is the lover of Finnick. So we do also have these moments between Katniss and Finnick before the others are brought back again, where we see their relationship develop quite a bit. They kind of have the same problem, or like the same struggle, because their loved one is held by the Capitol, and the only reason they're held there is because they care about them and they love them. And so the Capitol knows that torturing them will have an immediate and very, very hard effect on Katniss and Finnick. And I really, really loved seeing these moments of their friendship bloom and develop. I think that was beautiful, and I love Finnick so much. Like, we actually really get to know Finnick in this third book. And then we have this very gross scene where Gale actually implies that Finnick is now into Katniss, and it's just like, I hate this man so much. But this idea, like, he has like very interesting ideas about Katniss, but this idea that Katniss is seeking kind of the contact to someone who is suffering the same way she is suffering, who has the same trauma that she has. How can you sit there and be like, I think he's sweet on you now? It's like disgusting. Gale, you are disgusting. And honestly, for the people who would say that this series is about romance at all, you're very wrong. This book is not about, or this whole series is not about romance. But if you think that Gale would be a good partner, I would say maybe try therapy. I don't know. He is disgusting, and he's very obviously disgusting throughout all of the books. And I think because of the movies and because they have this like Hemsworth guy playing Gale, I think a lot of people were like, oh, but he's so hot. But I think that is because you would like to be with him, not because you think Katniss should be with him. Because absolutely not. Like, Gale is never a realistic love interest for Katniss, but he really likes to push her buttons and to see how far he can get with that. And I think he also has this idea in his head that if only the games would have never happened, Katniss would absolutely be in love with him, which is something that Katniss questions again and again as we go through the series. So I don't believe it. I don't think Katniss would have ever fallen in love with him. That's just my opinion. Moving right along, we do get the whole rescue thing, and now we're at the halfway point of the book. And that's obviously when we find out that Peter was manipulated in his memories. So now he thinks that Katniss is a mutation and that she is there to kill him, and he tries to kill her before she gets to do that. And this is obviously so sad and tragic, and we see it from Katniss's point of view. And for a long time, Katniss simply cannot deal with it. And it's like really, really sad to see, because, you know, Katniss has suffered through so much. So I don't want to sit here and be like, she needs to be nicer to him, because, like, honestly, everyone needs to be nicer to Katniss. But it's like really, really hard for her. But if we take a step back for a second and we remember that first scene on the roof, it's not the first scene, it's the second scene, on the roof of the training center in the first book, where Peter talks about his goal being that they can't kind of take away his identity, that he wants to die still being himself. So taking away his kindness and his love for Katniss with this manipulation that they did in the Capitol is actually the worst thing you can do to Peter. And it's so cruel because, yeah, that was his fear, that he would not be himself anymore. And with what they did to him, he clearly is not himself anymore. And all of his memories, or like most of his memories, have been altered, and he doesn't even know who he is anymore. So there we have tragedy number one for our main characters, his biggest fear becoming reality. That's not all, though. Obviously, the story goes on. We see that Katniss goes on different missions. The one thing I haven't mentioned yet is the hospital visit that they do in the first half of the book, which is obviously extremely sad and horrible, but again, I want to mention that these are things that happen in actual wars. If we look at Syria, for example, something that they did there was attacking hospitals on purpose. So it's not like this is fiction, it's something that happens all the time. And I need people to care when it happens in real life as well, not only when it happens in Mockingjay. We also have the whole nut situation. So they have this mountain in District 2 where a lot of the resistance to the rebels is still holding out. And so this is the first time where we see Gale come up with a very deadly kind of snare situation where he condemns a ton of people to death, just so that they can progress in the rebellion. And that is obviously already quite some foreshadowing to the end of the book. But moving right along, we then get to the final bit where Katniss decides that she really needs to go to the capital because she wants to be the one who kills Snow. She is very wrapped up in this idea of like getting revenge for what happened to Peter instead of like working with him. But in the end, she's kind of forced to do it because once she has done all the training, which she does with Joanna, which I love because I just love her so much, Katniss arrives in the capital, and not long after, Peter arrives there too. And it becomes obvious that Coin is hoping that Peter will take out Katniss because she has fulfilled everything that she needed to do as the Mockingjay. And now she's only a liability because everyone knows that Katniss does not like Coin. Now that obviously all goes tragically wrong, and we have some of the most horrific death scenes in the second half of Mockingjay. The way Boggs dies, absolutely terrible. Finnick is still like one of the things I cannot get over it. The way we lost him after he married Annie is like so tragic. And then we get, further and further, and things unfold, and we have this moment where Peter realizes that because of him, one of the crew members have died. And his first reaction is to be like, you need to kill me because now I see that I am the problem. And that is when we see kind of Peter still being Peter, because this is such a Peter reaction, and only he could be the one to be like, oh my God, I'm the problem. He doesn't even question it. And that is when we kind of like slowly see him come back around. He also has this moment when they go underground and we learn about, is it Pollux, like the AVOX, who had to work in this underground area, and everyone is like really touched by how horrible that was. And then Peter is like, hey, you've just become our biggest asset down here. And he's like the only person who knows what to say about all of this trauma and the tragedy. So we see kind of like slowly some Peter moments slipping in again. That is when we move towards tragedy number 2, and that is obviously for Katniss, the moment when she arrives in front of the palace where Snow is still hiding, and she sees Prim die. And not only does Prim die, but she dies in one of the traps that Gale came up with. And that really is like the big tragedy of this book, because if we go back all the way to the first chapter, the one thing Katniss was trying to do that set everything in motion was trying to save Prim. That was the only thing Katniss was thinking about. And then when we move a little bit further in the first book, her promise to Prim to at least try to survive is what carries her through the first book. And we end kind of, like there is a little bit more at the end, but we kind of end with Prim's death. So everything Katniss has tried to achieve, like her one premise for everything, is a failure in the end. And not only that, but it is Gale's fault. And with that, we do also kind of get like a tragic ending for Gale in a way, because he even says at the end to Katniss that the only thing he really had going for him was that he took care of Katniss's family while she was in the games. And it's true. And he messed that up as well. Trashy, trashy person. And there is so much build up to this, like to this final Gale moment. He makes so much about himself, and he is the kind of oppressed man who you kind of want to feel for him because he has been oppressed and it's not right what has been done to him. However, he not only thinks that he should have deserved better because he was oppressed, but because he's a man, he actually thinks he should have had privilege. He should be a leader of the rebellion. It's not enough to overthrow everything. He needs to be in a leading role, overthrowing everything. So it's also the arrogance, and they have so many moments where Katniss is seeing the humanity because she has been in these situations, in the games. She has seen people die over and over again, and it's really leaving that mark. And Katniss has so many moments, like when she sees people in distress, when she sees the fleeing citizens of the capital, and all she can see is like children who don't know where to go, and she doesn't think about how they're capital citizens. So there's one last thing I wanted to talk about because I had not really a discussion, but just like talking about it with Ksenia a little bit. And that is the question at the end about the games. So basically it is proposed that they will have one final Hunger Game where capital children will be chosen. And it is probably a bit controversial that Katniss decides to vote yes on that. But I think if you read where Katniss is at mentally, like she just learned that her sister is dead, that her whole thing that she tried to do has failed. She just learned that it's probably Gale's fault and that the people she has been working for are responsible for that. So she is in this moment completely alone in her head. And she says that this is just what humans do. And she has lost all trust in humanity. And really the only human being that ever really deserved her trust was Peter in a way. And he is slowly coming back, but he's still so broken. And I think it makes sense that she says yes, because she really has lost the belief in people, like the trust in people. And it is presented to her as a way to avoid further violence. It's kind of like portrayed as, hey, if we do these games, then maybe the calls for more heads to roll will finally cease. So I think it makes sense, but I would love to hear what you think in the comments. And I also love that Haymitch is kind of on her side. I think after reading Sunrise on the Reaping, you definitely understand why he's voting yes in a way. But the way he phrases it is that he says he's with the Mockingjay. And I also like that Katniss's vote isn't the final vote, that Haymitch's is the final vote. And he chooses this wording to say he's with the Mockingjay. And it's like this sign of loyalty, but also it's a sign of what he has lost in a way and where his allegiance lies, which makes more sense if you have read Sunrise on the Reaping. So yeah, Mockingjay, what a book. Now, rip out the epilogue, and it's perfect. We also have this discussion that Katniss has at the end with Plutarch about humanity, and that also really resonated with me in a way because Plutarch is very much kind of he has similar thoughts to Katniss, but his way is very cynical. And he's like, oh no, maybe this time humans will figure it out without war again. Who knows, and Katniss is just completely devastated by those thoughts. So I don't really want to talk about her killing Coin instead of Snow. I don't think that's really super interesting. I think it's very logical that that is what happens. I think that's all I'm gonna say. I think I've said mostly of what I wanted to say. So let me reiterate one more time. While this might be in a way a love story, this is not a romance. Katniss is a person who loves a lot of people. Her family, Gale, Peeta, Haymitch, Rue, Finnick, Joanna in a way, but it's not about romance. And this situation we have in the final chapter with Peeta is kind of like two very, very traumatized people helping each other, finding back to life. And it is beautiful, and there is a lot of love between them, and I think they do help each other out quite a bit. But I would never say it's a romance, and the main reason for that is that throughout the whole trilogy, what Katniss is trying to do has nothing to do with her romantic feelings at all. And she says that again and again and again. And she says it to Gale and she says it to Peeta, that this is not even what she is thinking about. And people are just pushing her buttons. And she is a very traumatized teenager who doesn't always know how to react to things. And that is something that me, when I read it for the first time, could relate to a whole lot, because I had a hard time understanding romance. And I feel like now that I'm in the middle of my 30s, I have finally grasped like some things about romance, but like it's been hard for me. And I always saw that in Katniss as well. And it's not the only thing that I saw in her that like really reminded me of myself in a way, but it's one of the things. And so that's a hill I will die on. This is not a romance. No romance in Hunger Games. Okay, I hope this was fun to watch. This video is going to be so very long and I'm very sorry about it, but I had so much to say. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want to talk about spoilers in the comments, make sure that you mark it clearly so no one gets spoiled by accident. I hope you have a lovely day and I will talk to you very soon. Bye!